This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. PLI is committed to keeping you ever current on the dynamic trends shaping the legal world. Learn more at pli.edu/ftpod.
Welcome to Fast Tracked, Emergent Issues in the Legal Profession, brought to you by the Practicing Law Institute. I'm your host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers. Buckle up as we hit the gas and explore the most dynamic trends shaping the legal world. I hope you'll join us as we explore the future of law today. Welcome back to Fast Tracked, Emergent Issues in the Legal Profession, Practicing Law Institute's podcast about all of the fascinating and exciting trends that are converging to create an unprecedented era of change in the legal profession. I'm your host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers. And as you all know, if you listen to the show, every episode, we love to bring somebody in to talk to us about what is happening at the cutting edge of technology and innovation in the law. And there's nobody better to talk to us about just that than our guest today, Jackie Schafer. Jackie is founder and CEO of ClearBrief.ai. And we are going to talk to Jackie today all about her interest in using technology to expand access to civil justice. We're going to talk to her about her background in a lot of different areas of the law and how they have combined to help her build work that really makes impact in lawyers and clients and the public's life. We'll talk about legal culture. I have questions for Jackie about entrepreneurship, being new to it myself, and we'll close out with some questions about the future of law from a macro level. So Jackie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a delight. And I was reading your very impressive background, and we'll dig into that a little bit, all the different places that you've been. But we really wanted to start out with something that jumped off the page to PLI's producer, Daniel Pinett. So hat tip to Daniel for spotting this. You were, before you went to law school, a BA from Penn in English and French. And during your time there, I understand you were a really accomplished a cappella singer. And I heard that you sang with John Legend's a cappella band. Is that true?
It is. And it was back when he went by John Stevens, and he had actually graduated the year before I started, but like all of the recent alum, they would come back and join us during our performances. And I was actually a member of his street team when he was getting started, because I don't know if many people know this, but he started in management consulting after he graduated from Penn, but he was performing on the side. So when he would come to Philly, I'd work his merch booth and that sort of thing. And I remember, he had a listening room for us when we released our a cappella album. So he's amazing, and just continue to love to see his career and, how everything has turned out.
That is so cool. I've never heard of that term, street team. So it's everybody that sort of supports an artist when they're on the road.
Yeah. When you're at the concerts, selling merch or, handing out free CDs or paid CDs. Yeah.
That is so cool. And so you and John Legend both have had really interesting and dynamic careers. And we certainly know a lot about his, but I want to learn a little bit more about yours. So you have been in a lot of different places in the legal industry. You've worked in public interest, you've worked in big law, you've worked in government positions for foundations. The sort of latter part of your career has really been focused on social impact tech. And I think it's great when somebody is able to take a whole bunch of different experiences and use them to combine into something really impactful, using some of the challenges that they've seen along the way. So I'm curious what you saw along the way that struck you as the most significant barriers to people, clients, small businesses, individuals, big businesses even, in accessing the type of legal justice that they want to see. And how have you thought about technology bridging that gap?
Yeah, so I definitely was one of those people who, when I graduated from law school, I really wanted to work in the public sector. But, I had law school loans, and I was lucky enough to have a summer internship with Paul Weiss in New York. And, actually realized when I started working there how invaluable the training is in big law. And, it's almost just like your fourth year of law school, right? And so I started my career in big law. But I always did, have a strong interest in doing pro bono work. And, I think it's really helpful to see how a case is handled when, you have some of the largest clients in the world, and then to handle a case where it's just you helping one person. And so I remember one of the first pro bono cases I did was to help a client in housing court in New York. And I remember going up against someone from the agency and bringing my super aggressive, Paul Weiss lawyering skills. And we did win for my client, and they were able to stay in their housing. And so, yeah, I think it's really just about understanding that it's really quite similar. The experience that, of navigating the justice system, it doesn't matter if you have all the money in the world, or if you are in public housing and getting pro bono assistance, the client still is really often just at the mercy of the system and needs a guide and needs someone to help them navigate and translate what's happening. So my career continued. I was in-house counsel. I worked for the state attorney general's office in Alaska and Washington state, doing appellate work, doing complex litigation. But I always managed to do pro bono work throughout that process, and had a really foundational experience actually right before I founded ClearBrief, where I was working on a pro bono asylum case. And in that situation, I had prepared this really long, 50-page brief that we had this final hearing. And as soon as we walked in, I could tell that the judge was it felt like they were quite biased against my client, against me. It was, just one of those experiences when you walk into the courtroom and you're like, okay, we're going to lose. This is horrible. But there was this moment where I pointed the judge towards some of the evidence that I had cited. And the judge, read this declaration, and it was from a therapist about my client's trauma. And the judge believed that therapist, and they believed the evidence, and we won. And he granted my client's asylum. And it was an incredible, moment of my career. And that really was also, a turning point for me, that it's really often about being able to surface the evidence and keeping that really visible to the decision maker so they can draw their conclusions. And in that case, it's less about your advocacy and more about making sure you give them the facts and let them draw their conclusions. So I think those principles have really influenced the company that I built, as well as, you asked about how this connects back to access to justice. And I still very strongly believe that our solutions to access to justice do need to come through the legal community, because it isn't realistic in most cases to ask the public to navigate these situations on their own, unless we're absolutely going to overhaul every single aspect of our justice system. That's a much bigger undertaking than, I think, helping lawyers communicate and giving them tools that make it easier for them to take on pro bono work and make it, simpler to actually do the work and communicate things back to their client and back to the decision maker.
And so you have seen technology as an essential part of solving the problems that you're describing. What is it about technology that you think is so powerful? And sort of a related question is, why do you think it's taken so long for the legal profession to sort of start to embrace technology as a way to scale services to people?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I actually I started ClearBrief in 2020. So it was before the latest, AI craze hit. So now I've been in the space for quite a bit. And I do continue to think that technology is important, but what's even more important is how users are communicating with their colleagues, with the court. And technology is just one aspect of that. So I don't think it's the entire solution to the issues that we look at. And so I think that's been a healthy perspective to bring as a technologist, that it's not just this, technology is a magic wand that is going to solve every problem, but it can help us with a very important problem, which is communicating with each other so that we can all see the evidence that we're discussing, as well as communicating that to the decision maker and communicating it back to our client. That's where I think technology can be very, very powerful. And to me, the biggest reason why we need it is because the volume of documents that we encounter in litigation nowadays is just astronomical, and it has grown exponentially. And so if we are to make sense of this and develop our story and develop the theory of the case, we need technology, honestly, just to deal with the volume of data that we have.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the time before and the time after maybe the Chat GPT moment and the craze that we're living through now with everybody popping up with new AI solutions for every problem under the sun. But as you said, it's not a self-executing solution technology. It really can't just be built without the humans involved. So could you talk a little bit about human-centered design and why it's so important in the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've been seeing this sort of gold rush happen in legal AI where VCs are saying, hey, we're going to just throw money at this idea of replacing lawyers. And I do think that's somewhat misguided because, they've tried many times to replace us. But I think the best way to approach it is, how are you empowering and giving people tools to not replace themselves? That's a kind of a hard sell if you want to, build a company on that concept. But how are you giving people tools to, if anything, sort of like multiply themselves? And so they can do more. They can do less if they want and have more free time. Those are the ways that I've approached, why behind ClearBrief. And then I also try to be really empathetic to what is the day-to-day like for our customers. So ClearBrief, we focus on litigators specifically. And so we're used by literally the largest global law firms in the world, all the way down to the, solo firms, boutique firms. We're also used uniquely, I think, by government agencies, by courts. We recently announced a partnership with the American Arbitration Association, where all their arbitrators are using ClearBrief. And then we're also used by in-house counsel, mostly focused on the folks who do internal investigations. So really in building a tool that can serve those audiences, we've had to spend so much time digging into what is a judge's emotional experience like when they open up, the case that they're working on, and they have these massive pleadings and they have 800,000 pages of evidence. How do we help guide them through that journey and shape that journey? So we're actually right in the midst of a really exciting user interface UI overhaul of ClearBrief, based on some of the insights that we've gotten from just really, spending a lot of time talking with users, observing them with them as they go through tasks in ClearBrief. And that is one of the most fun parts of this experience, to kind of get to learn about how everybody works in legal. We all think we maybe work the same way, and we don't.
Is there anything that's sort of surprised you about the user response to engaging with technology generally that maybe you wouldn't think of if you're sitting around a table and you're just designing something for other people?
Well, maybe just like one of the things that comes to mind is, my career was, as a litigator, especially, appellate litigation, you're so in awe and fear of judges, and you just think their writing, it's like comes from above. And you don't think about the fact that they also are human and they worry about the things that we care about too. Like, did I mess up the citation formatting? Did I actually misconstrue the meaning of that case? Did I miss an important fact? And, I'm making now a decision that's going to impact a family or, a massive company, and I didn't have all the facts. Or these are really stressful decisions that judges are making. And so that, in a way, was really interesting to think about, that technology can help them also feel like, they have another set of eyes to check over their work and make sure that they are achieving the high standards of accuracy that we expect of the judiciary. So maybe that's one aspect. Another interesting aspect, and again, I don't have maybe like a bigger point here, just then I thought this was very interesting, that in working with so many different firms across the country, there's a large variability in terms of how much of the writing process paralegals will handle, or just which parts of the litigation tasks paralegals will handle versus attorneys. And so I think that, there's definitely room for some good discussion in our profession about how we can incorporate making sure that, paralegals are a meaningful part of the technology revolution. And I think there's just a lot of potential to make everyone's lives better if we can, make sure that we're leveraging, the amazing skills that paralegals bring when we're doing this complex writing.
So let's talk a little bit about making everybody's life better. You have, and you currently, work with people who are working in the private sector, serving the biggest corporations in the world, and working with court systems who are serving everyone. And I see the split screen as well when I talk with colleagues who are in big law firms, and I'm moving into AI now because that's where all the conversation right now around tech feels like it's coming from. And the firms sort of are like, we get it. We need to figure this out. It's a real imperative for our clients. Where do we get started? And when I talk with my colleagues in the public interest or in government, they're much, much more concerned about the potential harms for AI because of the communities that they serve. And in some ways, it seems to me a little bit more hesitant to even start the process of thinking through how this technology could benefit people who either don't have access to lawyers now or who have historically, been marginalized by court systems. And it's a challenging conversation to have. And I'm curious how you're having these conversations in ways that can create some optimism, but also assure people about the ability to mitigate some of the risks that they're concerned about.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. We've been working on some exciting work in the pro bono AI space, and I can talk a little bit just at a high level about what we've been doing and sort of, I think it addresses what you're asking about. So, as an example, we've been partnering with a clinic organizer that helps organize a major pro bono clinic. And I'm super proud to say that we worked with them on a massive event that happened on MLK Day. So just, a couple weeks ago, and where we were able to serve about 160 plus individuals who use ClearBrief's generative AI form filler tool to help with beforehand. The clinic organizers sent out, a sort of a questionnaire for the individuals to fill out. And that way, then before the clinic, they were able to use ClearBrief to sort of mass create the starting point for these documents that the pro bono volunteers would be working on the day of the clinic. And that allowed them to get like a huge head start on getting these things done on that day. And so, we've been working closely with, this nonprofit. And I think we just see, firsthand what you're talking about, where there is definitely, I think, a fear at first around using technology. And the first thing that we can do to address that is the low-hanging fruit around, data security, and will this information be used to, to train large language models without my client's consent, sort of thing. And when you're working with a trusted vendor like ClearBrief, we are SOC 2 Type 2 certified to meet the strictest security requirements of the industry. We don't, train our large language, we use Microsoft Azure OpenAI's API for our work. And the agreement we have with Microsoft is that it's 0-day retention. So nothing is retained by that large language model. So it's just, it's not going to happen. So it's really you have to have a very clear conversation about the security architecture. And that's just level one. Level two, though, is there's a huge discomfort, I think, in general in the nonprofit world in terms of using technology, because it's just not something that anyone ever had budget for in the past. It hasn't been something that people were trained on. And I say this having been in-house counsel for a $3 billion national nonprofit, and, working to provide, grants across the country to help improve the child welfare system and all sorts of really impactful work. It just very infrequently involved technology. It never involved, AI prior to, maybe, I don't know, maybe things have changed now, but it just really wasn't considered a lever, an important lever that nonprofits could pull to improve their work. So it's basically asking people to get up to speed in this whole new area that seems so distant from their day-to-day priorities and the core of the work that they've been doing for the last, 20 or 50 years. So that's a very hard thing too. So it's really, and that point becomes about winning hearts and minds. So one thing I think that has happened, though, is the national and international uproar over ChatGPT and OpenAI means that everyone now has heard of AI and has heard of how sort of magical it can be. And that has given us an opportunity to have conversation with these nonprofit institutions that they're more curious than they've ever been. So if you can show up and sort of show them that you understand what they're trying to do, and that technology won't get in the way of their main priorities. That's something we've had to really make that clear, that we're not going to add another stressful thing to them when they already have such limited resources. And you just really have to kind of prove yourself. But I think it was so satisfying to be a part of that incredible clinic and see all these people benefiting from AI. And I think it's just a great example of how we can work together. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in my role at ClearBrief is bring our big law customers to the table as well, because there's a lot of folks in big law who want to do pro bono, but they don't have a ton of time. Well, guess what? That's really how AI can really help you. They also maybe don't have the right opportunities sort of ready for them to take on that, where we could say, look, this is going to be a 1-day commitment, or this is going to be a 3-month commitment, or something like that. Because we are connected with the nonprofits, we're connected with all these different groups, and we're connected with big law, we can bring everybody to the table around this work.
I love that. And I love the example that you used from the MLK Day clinic, because it shows a way of using technology that is very different from, I think, a lot of the screaming headlines that generate a lot of fear around, using people's data improperly or producing biased outputs. But it's more like, how do we accelerate and expand the work that is traditionally just done by hand or manually in areas that are not impacting any of those sort of sensitive issues. So zooming out across the entire profession, or thinking more broadly about lawyers, you and I have conversations with lawyers all the time about these topics, and they run the gamut from, this is the most amazing, this being generative AI, like, this is the most amazing thing to ever happen in my practice life, to, we're not ever going to use it. I don't trust it. It's flawed and nobody can ever do the work that I'm doing. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that lawyers have about AI and how much it might impact their practice?
Yeah. One way I would answer that question is, I think there's just a huge variation right now in how different tools and platforms are using and incorporating generative AI into their products. So the first thing is, you should not assume that just because a product has generative AI, it's doing the same thing and it's the same exact risk of hallucination. And I'll give a very concrete example. So with ClearBrief, one of our most popular tools is our generative AI instant hyperlinked timeline tool. We actually have an issued patent on that. We were the first to, market a generative AI timeline tool back in, a couple of years ago. So way that, other generative AI tools often start the interaction with the generative AI is to say something like, what do you want to do today? You can do anything. Prompt us and we'll do whatever you want. So that the problem is it results in people doing things like prompting it like, oh, find me all the dates that show that, John Smith is guilty or whatever. It's like, whoa, that is a very challenging. There's a bunch of, logical leaps that an AI will have to make to answer that, and to get an answer that a lawyer would find to be good quality. And so what we have is a lot of people doing prompting like that. And then they're like, oh my God, the answers were horrible. It was wrong about all this stuff. It hallucinated. So we designed ClearBrief so that it's not this open-ended prompting situation. It's a very step-by-step process where, you upload your documents. There's certain buttons that offer you different tasks, like the timeline tool. And then when ClearBrief will generate the timeline, it will tells you exactly what's going to happen. It's going to extract every date, put a summary of what happened, and then put a link to the source so that you can verify, and the source is even highlighted by AI as to where it got the information for the summary. And we have introduced a new sort of curated timeline option where you can give it a couple keywords to focus on. But again, it's not allowing you to take those leaps of saying, solve the case for me. Like it's not opening that up. And as a result, you have a much, much lower risk of hallucination. It's just simply not, it's not able to, because it's doing what, something that's more like a just sort of lower level task of what's in this document, write it here and summarize it. It's not taking 7 different leaps forward. So I think that's where we're in this interesting moment where some people are so ready for generative AI in the legal profession. They're like, just write the whole brief for me. I don't even need to look at it. Just get it filed. I'm so busy. And then our customers, though, we tend to, I think, attract, big law and these customers that really also really care deeply about their writing and about accuracy, and that this is really satisfying them, that generative AI can be extremely useful to them as long as it's caged and used in a very specific way. So, yeah, I don't know how we necessarily, bridge the gap other than it's just going to take some time. I've seen already a huge transformation, even in the last, 6 months, where you have, you have judges using it, you have arbitrators using it, you have people who are retired judges, using it, where their whole careers were spent using, totally different tools, and they've adapted to this. So I think we're going to get to a point this year where it really just becomes a little bit more the norm, that of course you're using some kind of AI tool. And also the norm is, of course, you're using something that gives you the ability to easily check it over. And of course, you're making sure everything is site checked. It's just going to be another part of our evolution as a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I was thinking about this week that the more you use it, the more it's sort of difficult to remember what life was like when you just opened up a document and started writing just using your own brain. And I think you're right that as people just start incorporating it in small areas, those areas will feel like, I can't believe I ever did this myself. And then bigger areas, until you're having a much more AI infused partnership, I guess, or partnership with the AI to practice. You mentioned, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jackie.
No, I completely agree.
It's weird, right? Like, isn't it weird to think about things that we did just using one brain a few years ago?
Yeah, it's just such second nature now that why should we have to do things manually? I mean, I think I really just remember this from practice of one of the things that ClearBrief does with a click is it will instantly create your table of authorities. And that's, by the way, that's not generative AI, that's classic, natural language processing. And I just remember feeling when I was in private practice, why do I have to do this? This is hell. I've just spent weeks in, writing this amazing brief and checking everything over. And now I have to do this book report thing on top of everything else. It's just one of those things like, why do we have this in our profession? Let's just, please, if we're gonna require this, make it so easy to comply with this using technology. It's one of those things that once you see that you can do it with a tool like ClearBrief, you'll never go back to doing it manually and spending, extra several hours before something's due. Same thing, we have a tool that will do your exhibits with a click because ClearBrief knows what pages you cited to. And versus, I used to print out 100 pages, throw away the pages I don't want to, cite to, make my separate cover pages. It's just this slog that, there is a reason why technology exists to help us with these things. It's so that we don't go insane.
I know. Now I'm having all these flashbacks to litigation in the mid-aughts and thinking about those things that we did. And very grateful to have the technology. And you mentioned, Jackie, arbitrators and neutrals and retired judges and your partnership with the American Arbitration Association. What do you see as the opportunities in alternative dispute resolution? Because that's such an interesting arena. It's so different in many ways from your sort of traditional court judgment of verdicts and rights and responsibilities. What do you see for the future there?
Yeah, I am so excited about the opportunity there because it's sort of like our chance to envision a different justice system without the restrictions that we have from, our courts, where this is a chance where the arbitrators and the parties can choose what technology they want to use, right? We don't get that choice when we litigate in state court or in federal court. We're stuck with these, potentially very antiquated systems that they paid for back in 94 and they're never going to, change from them. But this is such an exciting moment where you see the parties realizing, hey, we can actually, resolve this in a more expedient way. We can keep the evidence more visible in the process so that whenever we're referencing something, we can all see that document. It helps keep us all honest. It helps, make it more transparent how the arbitrator has gotten to their award and how they got to their decision. So it's a very exciting moment to be working with the American Arbitration Association. And what I love about it too is that it's reaching, the parties as well. So with our partnership, the parties also get access to use ClearBrief when they're using a AAA arbitrator. So it's giving, even the most conservative, right, big law partners are now being offered that, the arbitrator is using this tool and they would prefer that you use it because it's going to make it super easy for them to click on any citation in your brief and be able to see that source document. And now that partner is realizing, oh, well, okay, maybe I should use AI. Right? I mean, that's not going to happen to you in federal court where the judge is not going to ask you to use technology. So I think this is a very important turning point where, more and more practitioners are realizing or that, hey, it's time to learn this and it's time to take it seriously.
Yeah, I love that idea of sort of the social proof that comes through from the arbitrators or leaders and eventually judges, right? That not only should the lawyers be using it, but we're going to model first as the decision makers how to use this well. I love that thought. And you talked about how we're in such a really interesting era, and it feels already this early in 2025, like 2025 will be a really pivotal moment. So as we sort of wrap up and reflect back on all the things that you've talked about today, what are your predictions for legal technology in the next 12 to 18 months?
Probably the biggest news that I'm sure you saw is the popular awareness of the Chinese AI model DeepSeek, which has been said to perform at the same level as these OpenAI models that were created with billions of dollars of investment. And what's also very unique about the performance of DeepSeek is that it's available open source. So anybody can, well, if you have the capacity to, set up the server to run it. And actually now I just heard that today, Amazon Bedrock, they're making it available so that more people can use it and test it where there is absolutely no connection back to China or the data never gets sent out externally. So these models can be run locally. Anyway, without getting too far in the details, it really just means that there's a lot of price pressure now that's going to be put on OpenAI and on, also on, legal tech companies that have priced their product around the cost of those tokens. And by the way, that was never my approach with ClearBrief. I never wanted to tie the cost of our platform to, anytime you use it, it's going to cost you more money, because my sense was that deters people from using things when you worry about that. So we just always thought, look, we'll absorb the cost of the generative AI for our customers. And now that the price, seems like it's likely to come down for the AI tools, it really is going to become more about which platforms have paid the closest attention to how lawyers actually work, and which ones can train lawyers the best, which ones can communicate the value of their platform to people who are really busy. So I think it's really going to change and shake things up in terms of the legal tech market. So that's, of course, where I pay a lot of attention. My other biggest prediction is sort of what we talked about already, which is I think it's going to become more of the norm that everyone is by default using AI on their matters, even for their most sensitive cases, even when their clients are banks, that in fact, it's going to become more of a problem if you don't use AI, and you're going to have to justify that to the client, why you are doing everything manually, and where's the modernity to your practice. So those are some of my high level predictions.
I love that. I heard a funny quote the other day, that lawyers take such pride in their writing, rightly so. And the ones that are resistant to this, one of the reasons is because nobody could write as well as I could write. And it was a panel interview with corporate counsel. And one of the lawyers from the GC's office said they were disappointed because they knew their firm had not used AI because they found a typo in a brief. They were like, only a human being would have generated this typo. So I thought it was such an interesting way to think about it. It really flips it on its head.
Yeah.
And so
I hope this doesn't make, everybody more obsessed with typos than we already are.
Right. Exactly. I know. Focus on perfectionism, right? We'll have to have a whole other conversation about that. But we're so grateful to you, Jackie, for spending your very valuable time with us today to help us sort through what is happening in this moment and how to think about building technology better.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to encourage everyone that, by the way, I don't have any sort of special technical background. I was an English and French major. And so I hope everyone, feels empowered that, especially if you're a litigator listening to this, that, our job as litigators is always to learn new subject areas when we take on a new case. And this is just another, subject area that you can learn. It's very, it's probably easier to understand than a lot of the statutory, work that you do in your day to day. So don't be intimidated by, that it seems very technical. We're very technical thinkers.
That's a perfect note to end on. And if you're like litigators who like learning about really sort of random things in the course of your work, it is fascinating because every time you turn the topic of AI around and look at it from a different angle, there are just like hundreds of different implications that unfold. And to your point, I think a lawyer's mind would never get bored of thinking about all the ways that this could unspool.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Jackie. It has been such a delight to spend time with you today. And to everybody out there listening, thank you for spending your time with us. I know the perspective that Jackie brings to the conversation will really help those of you out there trying to grapple with what technology and AI mean for your practice. So thank you for spending your time with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Fast Tracked. Until then, be well and take care. I hope you enjoyed this fascinating conversation as much as I did. Visit pli.edu for more insights, education, and resources for navigating this dynamic landscape. And until next time, stay curious and stay adaptable as we work together to chart a course into an exciting future.